All right. Today's lesson is Acts 12, chapter 2. I'm going to count on you all to be verbose tonight because there's not many verses left in it. We have a few things to talk about. And if we go too short, I'm going to have to start doing the review. So, that being said, the key events in chapter 12 are James, the brother of John, is put to death by Herod. We studied that last week. Disciples praying for Peter. Peter's miraculous release. Or Peter's, what's the other word? Providential release. And Herod dies. So we'll just quickly catch up. Herod was the king at this time, but not Herod the Great. It was his grandson, Herod Agrippa I. When he passes away at the end of this chapter, he's the last Herod king over Judea. Three of his kids are further mentioned. Agrippa II, Bernice, and Drusilla are mentioned throughout the rest of Acts, but they are Roman governors. I think Agrippa is still referred to as a king because he's king of a northern province, but not over Judea itself. Then we looked at the timeline just to see where we're at. We know that Agrippa died in about 44 AD, so that tells us when this stuff was going on and about when this happened. Now, this could have happened a little bit later. I put it around 44. It could have happened up until 46 because the verse that talks about really should be in the next chapter. And that means it's after one of Luke's updates, and therefore it's a different story, and so it has a different timeline. But we know it's at least after 44. So what do we see? We saw James dies for his faith. And he had James, the brother of John, put to death with a sword. We saw a newspaper clipping from the time. And you got to imagine, again, we talked about this, how that would have affected the church, having one of the first apostles dead. And then because the Jews, not the Christian Jews, but the regular Jews, were happy that he did this, he started going after the other apostles. So he imprisons Peter, and then we see Peter's escape. And remember from Hebrews, some escaped the edge of the sword, others were killed with the sword. So the church was fervently praying for Peter, and their prayers were answered. An angel appeared and released Peter from prison, and off he went into the city. And that's about where we got. So we'll start now with Peter reports his escape. And when he realized this, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, who was also called Mark, where many were gathered together and were praying. So who's John Mark?
He's one of the brethren that goes with Paul, and then he comes back, and Paul gets upset with him and says, "I don't want to do it anymore."
Yeah,
but then they make up at the end.
Yeah, and what?
Is he related to Barnabas?
Yes, he's Barnabas' cousin of Barnabas. This is his mother's house, and we knew Barnabas was fairly well off. He donated land to the church cause early on, back into Priscilla when she was killed. Aquila, and I'm saying it wrong. Yeah. By all appearances, the whole family was well off because when they described the mom's house, that it had an outer gate and a courtyard, that was rather unusual for the time. most people just had a house, and then they had a second, they used the roof as like a second room. So the fact that she had a place big enough with a gate and a courtyard, and then the house big enough for their church gathering, she was fairly well off. It's interesting to note that I was looking at F.F. Bruce here, and he was talking about how the church in Jerusalem was too big to meet all in one place. They could meet occasionally in the temple for a while, but that probably wasn't a good idea right now. So they were meeting from house to house, like it tells us. So they were broken up in smaller groups that would be like small congregations to us. So when we see Peter go back here, he's most likely going back to where his group of people that he's associated with, they're all worried about him. That's probably where he was attending, we could say. So we were talking about John Mark. What else do we know about John Mark? Dion, what do you know about John Mark?
I don't know the context.
It's just talking about who John Mark is. How else do we know him in the Bible? We said he's a cousin. He traveled with Paul.
Don't they think that John Mark wrote the book of Mark?
Yes, that's the general consensus, is that he wrote the book of Mark. In some further research, some of the very earliest church fathers said that John Mark became like the aide-de-camp to Peter when he was in Rome. And so he spent time with Peter, which would explain why, when he wrote the gospel, he had some good insight into what happened. We'll let that pass by. Because we don't know that either John Mark or Barnabas were Christians before Pentecost. So they may not have known Jesus directly. They may have been what you call second generation Christians. All right. So they're together in the house of John, the house of John Mark's mother, Barnabas's aunt, I would think. And they're praying. And now what are they praying for? We talked a little bit about this last week.
For Peter.
Release.
The release of Peter, right? They saw James, and they probably prayed for James, and James was killed. Now Peter's arrested and put under a heavy guard. And he's in jail during the time of the Passover. And now it's about to be that morning. And they expect Herod to bring him out and kill him in the morning. So they're upset, they're praying, and you get a funny response from them when it happens now. When he knocked at the door of the gate, a servant girl named Rhoda came to answer. So now he's out, he went to the place where his people were to tell him what's going on. When she recognized Peter's voice, because of her joy, she did not open the gate, but ran in and announced that Peter was standing in front of the gate. Rhoda forgets to open the gate, leaves Peter standing out there. Now, Peter's trying to be quiet, and he's trying to hide from the guard, and she just leaves him standing there. I think it's quite funny. And they say to her, "You are out of your mind." But she kept insisting that it was so. They kept saying, "It is his angel." What do you guys think they meant by that? So there's a couple different thoughts on it. Brad?
It was a messenger sent by God to give him some news.
That's a possibility. They thought it was his angel, though.
Mhm.
Maybe a ghost.
Spirit.
Um, I mean, we talk about the concept, but the concept was prevalent at this time in history that you had a guardian angel. Now, we don't ever hear that concept really talked about. John has hinted at it in his preaching that there are angels around us all the time. So they may have thought it was an angel. And there's some that thought it was like his spirit. But I think we would call that a ghost, wouldn't we? So it's interesting what their thoughts were on it. And again, messenger, his guardian angel, his spirit. I don't think we know enough. Brad?
Of course, any of those that we've just talked about probably could have just appeared in the room where they were already at. If it was sent by God, I mean, that's
Right?
a very good possibility.
Yeah, the angel just appeared in the cell with Peter.
Sure.
So it's interesting that here they are praying for his release. The servant girl comes in and says, "Hey, Peter's at the door." And they don't think, "Oh, our prayers are answered." They discount it and say, "Oh, it's got to be his angel, his spirit, something." So, there's some little funny things going on here. The fact that Rhoda leaves him standing at the door, the fact that they say she's out of her mind.
Either way, you think they would have rushed to the door to see who it was.
Yeah, right away. I mean, if somebody said, "Oh, I want to see the spirit," or "I want to see the angel." So it is interesting that they sit there and bicker for a little while before they go and answer at the door. But Peter continued knocking, and when they had opened the door, they saw him and were amazed. I would think overjoyed would be the right word, amazed that he somehow got out. I mean, we know that with prison guards, if they let their prisoner go, they take that place. So you have 4 guards on a 3-round rotation watching him. You don't expect him to get out without the power of God, of course. Yes.
I want to take the class off on a tangent, but,
Go ahead, do it. We have time.
okay. I was wondering how many of us, like Audra and I, have experienced where we prayed and immediately got an answer. Has that happened to you?
Yeah. A lot of times my answers are no, and I don't realize that God was right until a long time later. Those seem to be the ones that stick with me. Of all the football plays, I remember the one when I didn't get the first down. We tend to remember the negatives in our life more than we do the positives, which should really be the other way around. We should remember the positives more often, but we tend to remember the negatives. So there's many times when I prayed for something, I didn't get it, and then years later I said, "Man, I couldn't be where I am if God had answered it the way I wanted. Instead, He did this, and I'm in a much better place."
Well, I would say the last time it happened to, I guess, us, was when we were praying for something to happen, when we just barely started looking for a preacher, and what happened?
We found the one that was probably the best for us.
Yeah.
Oh, he's blushing.
Close the door and said, "Don't open."
I believe that was a prayer answered. Absolutely. We needed somebody, and it didn't take but a couple days, So we can never discount the power of God and the power of prayer. Never. Yeah.
I think that's the key here is how much power does God have? So when he grants us the little things, it's kind of easy for us, we'll say, oh, thank God. Or when something positive happens, we want to say, oh, it's a miracle. But when it's something that we just don't dream would happen, and still we pray for it, but we're praying really with the idea, yeah, it's never going to happen. He's never going to be set free, and he shows up at the door. It's a hard thing to accept it. I think it would be a hard thing for us to accept.
Yeah, if we were in one of the nations that arrest Christians and stuff, and we're praying, and in the middle of service they just walked in, we would be amazed, even though we're praying for them, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
I mean, we're supposed to pray with confidence, but you're right. When the big things happen, sometimes, I don't know, do we think we're not worthy of the big things? It's, I'm gonna let Wilson, and I'll come back to you again. Wilson?
The power of prayer is omnipotent. One time we, in our church in San Francisco, Brother Hung, he needed to translate the book of Matthew into Chinese, and we needed the cash to get the book published. So we prayed about it, so then we could spread the book into China. So we prayed about it, and then myself and a few other guys got together and wrote the letter, the solicitation letter to some of the various congregations, Texas, Arizona. We have one church that sent us a check for $3,000.
Yeah.
We
Prayer.
were able to get the book published.
Yeah. That's a prayer answer. Yeah.
But even now, as we focus on their response, imagine how strengthened they were once it came to accept that, we prayed for this impossible thing, and it actually happened. It would be interesting if we saw some follow-up on some of those individuals, how they were, how confident they were in the future.
Yeah.
After this. So this may have just been for the strengthening of those that witnessed it.
And we probably, and I have before, but we probably don't thank God enough for answered prayers. We pray every week for the sick, but do we pray and say thank you for what you've done already? We probably should pray more, thanking him for what he's done for us. He does everything for us. So, any other comments about this before we go on? Okay. But motioning them with his hand to be silent. So here he is outside. He's still hiding from possible guards looking for him. He doesn't know. He does not sure how he got out. Thought it was a vision. He assumes that the guards are looking for him. He described to them how the Lord had let him out of the prison. And he said, report these things to James and the brethren. Then he left and went to another place. I'll mention again, you see James here, definitely having a seat of authority. Peter reports it to his people, but he doesn't want that story to just die there. He wants James and all the other brethren to know about it too, so that they can all thank God for the prayers answered.
And this is James, the brother of Jesus?
This is, yes, James the Just. He's one of the three pillars of the church when Paul says he went to see the pillars. It's Peter, John, and James, the Lord's brother. So he's one of the leaders of the Jerusalem church. And then it says, then he left and went to another place. Now we just read that. I just read it and went over it many times when I was reading some commentaries. What do you think another place meant?
Another city.
Somewhere, right? You wouldn't believe the theories out there and how these commentaries, they take their pet theory and they're so confident about it. You know, one said, this is where Peter died and went to heaven. Well, that's unlikely. Some said he went to Rome from here. Well, this would be, I think it was about 44. Some authors think 42 was too early in Rome. Well, it was 44, not 42, approximately. Others think he went to Antioch, which is not a bad guess. He most likely needed to get out of the hands of Herod, so he probably left Jerusalem. As Dion would say, if we needed to know, though, the Bible would have told us, right? One of Dion's favorite sayings to try to derail me. We need to know it, it told us. But then we wouldn't have anything to talk about. Why didn't the disciples believe Rhoda when she told them Peter was at the door? We were discussing this as we went.
They knew how well protected he was or guarded he was.
Yeah.
That would have been humanly impossible to escape from there.
It was impossible.
It was impossible.
It was impossible because it took a miracle to get him out. So it was impossible. I mean, granted, there could have been a giant earthquake and other things that could have got him out, but it was virtually impossible that Peter was going to get out. He was going to be put to death. I saw another hand.
It could also maybe be a lack of faith too. If you pray, you have to pray fervently.
Yeah, that's what we said. Like Dion was saying, when it's a big thing, sometimes we aren't as confident as we should be in getting the result. What if they prayed for James and James was put to death? So what's a key component to our prayers?
God's will.
And I say it all the time, if it's your will, if it's your will. So if God had plans for James to be put to death to spur the word, but he had other plans for Peter, then God's will is what's going to happen.
Just a quick, it really is a balance reading this, that they're highlighted for their prayer. They did pray.
Yeah.
They do believe, they do have faith, but it demonstrates that we can have faith and we can still grow our faith.
Yeah.
We can have a measure. They had enough faith to pray, but not enough faith to believe that it was him.
Yeah.
And so that's the situation all of us are in. It's not a have or don't have. It's, we have faith and we can grow it. And even later, we can grow more faith. And usually it's by some of the things we experience.
So when does my faith get to max?
When you make heaven your home.
When I'm in heaven, I think. I think as long as we're alive, we can always grow. We can always grow. Any other comments on this before we go to the next section? Okay. Peter's escape is discovered. Now, when day came, there was no small disturbance among the soldiers as to what could have become of Peter. Well, that's an understatement. 4 soldiers wake up and their captive is gone, and they know the consequence. Now, I was reading one commentary this afternoon that although that was a Roman rule, that when you're an outlying providence like this, the governor doesn't always have to, or the king in this case, doesn't have to always apply it. I think he's going to, though. So regardless of that, they're going to be upset that he's.
Well, he had no reason not to apply, because
None at all.
as we looked at this is a miracle.
Yeah.
So from his standpoint, he's not ready to accept that it's a miracle. So it's incompetence.
It's
They let
incompetence.
him go. They did not do their job well enough. One or the other, one way or another. He's
Are they-
gonna hold them responsible.
Or they were secret Christians conspiring, whatever. So he's obviously going to be suspicious. I set a huge guard. I have 2 of you guys chained to him. How could he have gotten away from you without you being involved? So, yeah, he has no reason to be lenient with them, and he's not. When Herod had searched for him and had not found him, he examined the guards and ordered them to be led away to execution. Now you can read examine the guards as a euphemism. He probably wasn't gentle with them. He probably waterboarded them. Not that they did that then, but my point is he probably was rough with them to find out the truth. And when he couldn't, he had them executed. Then he went down from Judea to Caesarea and was spending time there. So from Luke, we get a little time hint here. This scene happened. He goes to Caesarea and some time has passed. Again, with Luke, we don't know how much time. What was Herod's reaction to Peter's release? He thanked God, didn't he? He had a pretty bloody reaction to it. And then we're coming to the end here, definitely the end of Herod. The death of Herod Agrippa I. Now, he was very angry with the people of Tyre and Sidon. And with one accord, they came to him, and having won over Blastus, the king's chamberlain, they were asking for peace because their country was fed by the king's country. What's a chamberlain? Just so you all know.
The servant,
It's a servant, but he's a special kind of servant.
like a cupbearer.
The personal one that tastes everything and.
It's more than that. He's like the doorkeeper for the king. You can't get to the king unless you go through the chamberlain. Just like with our president, he has a chief of staff. So think of it as like a chief of staff. You don't get to the king until you satisfy Blastus. And why are Tyre and Sidon needing food from him?
There's famine going on.
There's a famine going on, makes it extra critical. But Tyre and Sidon, from all the way back to Solomon, have always been reliant on food coming from this area. So they've always never had enough agriculture around their cities. So they've always used trade to get their food. So if the king gets mad at them, cuts off their food, what's going to happen to them? You know, they're going to be in a bad way. So they decide we need to go make up to the king.
Sorry.
Matt.
Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry, Matt, Alan. This is theory about food and what you're talking about. When the country has no grain, they have no money. When they have no money, they cannot feed their army well. They cannot feed the army well, cannot pay them well. Then their army comes apart and they lose the battle.
That or the army turns on them and
Both.
yeah. So when you can't supply your people with food, you know, and we talk about the Herods and, you know, generally they were hated by the people, but they were known for keeping a huge store of grain. And when there was problems, they out of the kindness of their heart supplied food to the people of Jerusalem and Judea. So on their plus side, they tended to make sure their people were fed. Now, was it just kindness, or were they afraid of that very thing, that the people would turn on them if they didn't have food? So whatever it is, the people, I'm sure, were happy when there was lacking in food and the king supplied it for them. On an appointed day, Herod, having put on his royal apparel, took his seat on the rostrum and began delivering an address to them. And the people kept crying out, "The voice of a God and not of a man." And immediately an angel of the Lord struck him because he did not give God the glory, and he was eaten by worms and died. Now, we see the word immediately there, and we have to look at it carefully because they kept saying it. So at which point did they keep saying it did become immediately? I think the thought is before the end of that day, before he left that thing, at some point, the Lord said, "Okay, you've had more than enough time to not take the credit from me," and struck him.
Yeah, I was gonna say, when it became apparent that he was gonna take the glory himself.
Yeah. And it says, and then there's a comment that says, "And he was eaten by worms and died." That part doesn't mean he immediately died. And I'll read you Josephus here in a second. He was struck immediately. But by historical records, he died 4 or 5 days later.
Slowly.
Yeah, slowly being eaten by worms. Let me read you from F.F. Bruce. He says, "We are indebted to Josephus for a parallel account of what followed. At Caesarea," says Josephus, "Agrippa's exhibited show in honor of Caesar, knowing that it was this celebration as a festival for his welfare. They came together for this occasion a large number of provincial officials and others of distinguished position. On the second day of the show, Agrippa put on a robe made of silver throughout, of quite wonderful weaving, and entered the theater at break of day. Then the silver shined and glittered wonderfully, and the sun's first rays fell on it. And its resplendent inspired a sort of fear and trembling in those who gazed at it. Immediately his flatterers, those are the people that are sucking up to him and saying he's a god, called out from various directions in languages which bode him no good, for they invoked him as a god. 'Be gracious to us,' they cried. 'Hither we have revered you as a human being, but henceforth we confess you to be more than mortal nature.' He did not rebuke them, nor did he repudiate their impious flattery. But soon afterward he looked up and saw an owl sitting on a rope above his head, and recognized it at once as a messenger of evil, as on a previous occasion it had been a messenger of good. And a pang of grief pierced his heart. At the same time, he was seized with severe pain in his bowels, which quickly increased in intensity. He was hastily carried into the palace, and when he had suffered continuously for 5 days from the pain in his belly, he died in the 45th year of his life, in the 7th year of his kingship." So there's a historical account that parallels exactly what Luke is saying here, and giving us a little bit more detail. And Josephus would have written this not long after this happened. So again, that's historical, it's not biblical, but a king dying is probably pretty big news to a nation. So there's probably a lot of truth in what happened there.
The immediately was that the Lord struck him.
Yes, that's what I was making. Our point was immediately the Lord struck him. And it even said in the historical account, he hadn't even got up and he was struck with pain in his bowels. And they go on, doctors throughout history have been trying to say, was it appendicitis? Was it a ruptured bowel? Was it this? Again, does it matter to us? No, we know the Lord did it.
But we do always try to explain it away with something
Well-
non-miraculous. If it was appendicitis, we see that suddenly come on, and so that's just a natural thing. That wasn't God.
Well, it could very well been a natural thing that he didn't have and suddenly he had. And why did he have it? Because the Lord wasn't pleased with him. And remember, what does the Bible tell us about kings and rulers? They serve at his pleasure. They're servants of his. And throughout history, when they take the glory to themselves, what happens? I wish it would happen more in the present world, but I mean, who ate grass and brayed like a donkey, and why, We see these throughout the Bible. So how did Herod die?
The Lord struck him
The Lord struck him with what though?
with some malady.
Something. And it was bad enough that eventually worms were eating at his belly. So it was some kind of huge infection. Perforated bowel, something like that. Something that just ate up his insides. I imagine 5 days of pain because you took God's glory would have an effect on you. But do you think it was too late? I think it was too late. I don't think he could have stopped it at that point. Wilson.
If we look at specific, I know the Bible doesn't mention this. God, if the bowel movement wasn't moving or he was affected, he must have had diarrhea all the way.
I'm sure it wasn't pretty.
Yeah.
The fact that they knew that there were worms, he could have even had. Eventually, it opened up, but we don't need to be too graphic. So we've already been too graphic.
Well, the only reason why I mentioned that, I was reading this emperor. He had bad diarrhea, and he fell on his horse, and then one of his guards killed him. But the diarrhea was so bad, it might have been the same painful effect like what he's experienced.
People used to die of dysentery all the time. I mean, up until 120 years ago, they were dying from dysentery. So I think even during World War I.
Civil War.
Yeah. But the word of the Lord continued to grow and be multiplied. What is this? What do we call this kind of verse? What do I call this kind of verse? It's a Luke update, which shows it's the end of one of his vinaigrettes. And therefore, according to verse 24, what we just read, did Herod's efforts have an impact on hindering the growth of the church? Did it slow him down? As a matter of fact, like Dion was saying, the fact that Peter was released, wouldn't that have just amazed them and strengthened their faith? And I think that Luke's telling us that. And then I guess I got to do it. And Barnabas and Saul returned from Jerusalem when they had fulfilled their mission, taking along with them John, who was also called Mark. This should be verse 1 of chapter 13, and I will be putting it there because it doesn't belong after the close. The biggest divide in all of Acts is between Peter and Paul, and why they threw one verse about Paul on the end of Peter's section, I don't know. It's so obvious this verse belongs in the next chapter. I don't understand how they divided the Bible up. I really don't. So what mission were they returning from? We'll talk about that next time because we're really out of time. Thank you, class. And I believe, Brad, you have our song tonight? Thank you. And then let me get out of your way and you can take over. Everyone grab a book if you haven't already.
Our first song will be number 72, Be With Me, Lord. And after our singing, I think Wilson has the Lord's Supper. Okay. Number 72, Be With Me, Lord. Know me. Be with me, Lord. I cannot live without thee. I dare not try to take one step alone. I cannot bear the loads of life unaided. I need thy strength to lean myself upon. Be with me, Lord, and then if dangers threaten, if storms of trials burst above my head, if lashing seas bleed everywhere about me, they cannot harm or make my heart afraid. Be with me, Lord, no other gift or blessing thou couldst bestow could with this one compare. A constant sense of thy abiding presence, where'er I am, to feel that thou art here. Be with me, Lord, when loneliness o'ertakes me, when I must weep amid the fires of pain. And when shall come the hour of my departure for worlds unknown, O Lord, be with me then. One page over, number 74. Abide with me. Know me. Abide with me, fast falls the eventide, the darkness deepens, Lord, with thee abide, when other helpers fail and come first, flee. Help of the helpless, oh, abide with me. Swift to its close, ebb out life's little day. Earth's joys grow dim, its glories pass away. Changed and decay, in all around I see. O thou who changest not, abide with me. I need thy presence every passing hour. What but thy grace can foil the tempter's power? Who like thyself my guide and stay can be? Through clouds and sunshine, oh, abide with